Summer, 1944. The Kansas plains shimmered under a sun so merciless it bleached the sky pale as bone. The air quivered with heat, cicadas grinding their endless song, and the barbed wire strung around the prison camp glittered like a necklace of thorns. Dust rose from the convoy trucks as they rolled to a halt, brakes hissing, the iron scent of engine oil mixing with the dry sweetness of wheat fields stretching just beyond the fence. The world looked both endless and caged. From the back of one truck, a cluster of German women stepped down, their uniforms faded, their postures stiff, eyes darting with suspicion as if cruelty might leap out from behind every post. Liesel Hartmann was the first to land on the ground, boots sinking slightly in the dirt. At 19, she carried herself with the brittle defiance of someone far older. Once a nurse's assistant for the German Red Cross, she still clung to the posture of discipline. Chin high, gaze sharp, a braid coiled tightly at the back of her head as though order alone might protect her. She expected the worst, jeers, spitting, perhaps even a rifle but across the back. She whispered to Anna Vogel, who followed close behind, "Remember, never let them see you afraid." Anna adjusted her round glasses and gave the faintest nod. At 26, she had been a schoolteacher before the war twisted her life into something unrecognizable. She carried a satchel with her only precious possession, a small journal, pages already half filled with looping, careful handwriting. Where Liesel radiated defiance, Anna exuded a quieter strength, an instinct to observe, to record, to endure by noticing every detail. She looked at the fences, the guard towers, the sun-bleached American flag snapping overhead, and thought, so this is captivity. From the shadows of a guard post, Captain James Whittaker observed the new arrivals. His uniform clung damp to his shoulders in the heat, but his expression remained steady, measured. Whittaker was a man weathered by command, early 40s, eyes carved with lines of both vigilance and fatigue. He had fought in France during the last war and carried its ghosts silently. He believed discipline was necessary, but cruelty, he often said, was a tool too dull to carve anything but hatred. His superiors had warned him, treat the enemy with respect, or the Geneva Convention would bite back when American boys were captured overseas. Still, his reasons went deeper. He believed mercy could be stronger than iron. The guards fell in line, rifles slung, boots thudding as they corralled the women toward processing. Among them was Private Robert "Bobby" Malone, barely 20, freckles on his nose, a Texan drawl thick as molasses when he spoke. The war had plucked him from a cotton farm and dropped him into this strange duty, guarding German women who, to his surprise, looked not much different from girls back home. His gaze lingered a moment too long on Liesel, who turned her head sharply, jaw tight, as if his glance itself was an insult. The women's steps faltered when they saw the mess hall doors open wide, and from inside drifted a smell that stopped them cold. Yeast, coffee, something rich and warm that no prison should offer. A soldier carried out a tray balanced with bowls, steam rising, and, unbelievably, a pitcher of Coca-Cola, its dark fizz catching the sunlight. Bobby grinned as he set a cone down on the railing, a scoop of makeshift ice cream made from condensed milk and Coca-Cola syrup. "Ladies," he called, drawling the word like it was half joke, half respect. Liesel froze. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Ice cream. She'd expected chains, mockery, hunger gnawing at her bones. She hissed at Anna in German, "A trick. They want to soften us before they strike." But Anna's eyes softened. She inhaled the sugar-sweet scent drifting across the yard and whispered back, "Even a trick can taste real." One by one, they were offered food. A spoon pressed into a calloused hand, a bowl filled with beans and cornbread, a small scoop of that strange fizzing ice cream. The women hesitated, glancing at one another as though waiting for permission. Whittaker gave it with a curt nod. "Eat," he said simply. The first mouthful was almost unbearable. Liesel clenched her jaw, refusing at first, then finally let the spoon touch her lips. Cold sweetness flooded her tongue, alien, effervescent, a taste tied to the enemy's abundance. Tears pricked her eyes, not from joy but humiliation. How dare kindness undo me faster than cruelty could? She turned her face away so no one would see. Anna, meanwhile, took her time, writing silently in her mind. "I thought captivity would taste like iron and ash. Instead, it tastes like sugar and fizz." She tucked the memory away for the next page of her journal. The guards expected laughter, complaints, maybe resistance. Instead, silence settled over the women as they ate, broken only by cicadas and the occasional nervous clink of spoon against tin. The air felt fragile, as though any loud word might shatter it. Then, from the far end of the bench, a young German auxiliary burst out with a laugh, startled by the cold shock of ice cream against her teeth. Bobby snorted in reply, muttering, "Well, guess prison ain't half bad, huh?" The tension cracked, just a hair. Some of the women smiled in spite of themselves, though quickly smothered it. When the meal ended, Whitaker stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of command but not malice. "You will be treated according to the rules here. You work, you follow orders, you keep discipline. You will eat, you will rest. No more, no less." He paused, meeting their eyes, letting the promise of fairness sink in. Then, with a tone that was almost weary, he added, "You are prisoners of war, but you are also women. Remember both." That night, inside the wooden barracks lined with narrow bunks, Liesel lay awake, staring at the rafters. She heard the steady breathing of the others, the shuffle of boots outside as guards changed posts. The sweetness still lingered on her tongue, bitter as betrayal. She pressed her palms over her face and whispered, "It will not last. Nothing this kind ever lasts." Anna, a few bunks away, opened her journal under the faint glow of a contraband candle stub. Her pencil scratched softly as she wrote, "Today, I expected hatred. Instead, I was handed ice cream. Perhaps America wishes to trick us, but if so, I will gladly be fooled. The fences are high, but for a moment, they tasted like nothing at all." She closed the book with a sigh, pressing it to her chest. Across camp, Whitaker sat at his desk, loosening his collar, pouring himself a measure of bourbon. Reports from Europe cluttered his desk, battles lost, towns bombed, the steady grind of war. He thought of the women's eyes when they tasted the ice cream. He thought of his own daughter, 6 years old, who had once asked him if the lady enemies would cry in their sleep. He had told her yes, and that was why they must be treated with care. Now he wondered if he had been speaking more to himself than to her. Bobby, meanwhile, leaned on the barracks wall outside, humming a tune from home. He tapped the butt of his rifle against the dirt, still grinning at the memory of the women's startled faces. "German or not," he murmured, "a smile's a smile." He didn't notice Liesel's shadow at the window slit, watching him with eyes full of questions she refused to let herself ask. The night deepened, stars glittering hard and bright above the plains. The fences loomed, silver in the moonlight, holding both sides in a fragile balance. Within those boundaries, kindness and suspicion had met for the first time, circling each other like wary dancers. Liesel finally closed her eyes, her heart caught between dread and longing. For the first time since capture, she felt the faintest tremor of something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to hope. Yet even as it stirred, she clenched her fists tighter beneath her blanket. Because hope, she knew, could be the cruelest trick of all. And somewhere beyond those glowing fences, the war still raged, waiting to tear kindness to pieces. The morning bell clanged against the still air, a flat metallic cry that stirred both guards and prisoners into weary motion. Within the barracks, the German women pulled themselves from thin mattresses, breath steaming faintly in the early chill before the sun had fully risen. The scent of hay, soap, and bodies hung close, mixing with the faint sweetness of cornbread drifting from the mess hall across the yard. Life behind the wire had begun to settle into a rhythm, though rhythm did little to soften the ache of captivity. Anna Vogel adjusted her glasses and folded her blanket with meticulous care, each corner aligned, as if discipline could anchor her. She opened her journal, jotting a quick note before work call. The fences hum with their own music, louder than cicadas. Every morning they remind us that the world exists just beyond reach. She closed the book, hiding it in her satchel. Her writing was more than memory. It was resistance, a way to claim something that the fences could not contain. Liesel Hartmann moved more briskly, braiding her hair back with sharp tugs, her lips pressed into a line. She carried herself as though still in uniform service, chin high, posture erect. Yet her eyes betrayed her restlessness. She loathed the routine, the neat rows of bunks, the orderly meals, the guards' watchful eyes. In her mind, every kindness was a rehearsal for betrayal. When she heard the guards outside exchanging jokes in English, she muttered to Anna. "They laugh because they think we are broken." Anna, brushing a wrinkle from her skirt, answered quietly, "Or perhaps because they are trying not to think about war at all." Outside, Captain Whitaker strode across the yard, his shadow stretching long in the pale dawn. He greeted the guards with a nod, inspected the lines, then stood at the front as assignments were read aloud. His voice was calm, deliberate, never raised. He believed order was enough to command respect. To him, cruelty was a sign of weakness, a lazy man's tool. Still, he kept his revolver polished, his eyes sharp, because mercy without vigilance was an open gate. The women were scattered to tasks. Some worked laundry, scrubbing American uniforms until their fingers puckered with cold water. Others mended torn clothing or peeled endless baskets of potatoes. Liesel found herself assigned to the infirmary, her medical training recognized. She washed instruments, bandaged minor wounds, and watched as American guards came in for treatment. The irony needled her. She had once tended German soldiers with pride, yet here she stood, wiping the blood from her enemy's knuckles. Still, her hands moved with precision, refusing to betray the turmoil of her thoughts. Anna's group was sent to the sewing room, where bolts of rough cloth were stacked in neat towers. The hum of the sewing machines was constant, a droning reminder of time passing. She found a strange comfort in the repetition, her hands working even as her mind wandered. Once, while adjusting the thread, she hummed a German lullaby under her breath. To her surprise, one of the guards outside the door tapped along with the rhythm, then softly whistled back a tune of his own, an American hymn she did not know. Their melodies collided, foreign but oddly harmonious, before each fell silent again. By midday, the sun pressed down heavy, and the camp shifted into a quieter rhythm. In the mess hall, the women sat at long wooden tables, bowls steaming with beans, cornbread stacked beside them. Coca-Cola bottles clinked against tin cups, the dark fizz a curiosity that never lost its strangeness. Some sipped cautiously, others gulped with secret delight. Liesel always drank quickly, as if to rid herself of evidence. Anna, meanwhile, studied the bubbles, scribbling afterward in her journal, "The drink tastes of laughter." A weapon of its own, perhaps, the kind that disarms without gunfire. Private Bobby Malone, leaning casually by the door, watched with a grin. "Never thought I'd see the day Germans were fussin' over cornbread like it's gold," he drawled to another guard. His voice carried, and one of the women muttered in German, "They think we are children." Anna translated softly, but added, "Maybe they see us as human instead." Liesel shook her head, refusing to give ground. The afternoons stretched long. The women worked in the fields just beyond the barracks, harvesting wheat under guard. The sight of golden acres rolling toward the horizon stung with irony. Home was just as golden, just as fertile, but unreachable. Liesel paused once, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse, and whispered, "Freedom looks the same everywhere. The difference is who holds the keys." The Americans, for their part, maintained a peculiar mix of formality and levity. Some kept distance, eyes cold. Others exchanged words, attempted fractured German, or offered clumsy jokes. Bobby was among the latter. Once, when a ball rolled across the yard from the guard's baseball game, he tossed it toward the women and pantomimed a swing. Curious stares met him. At last, one of the auxiliaries took the bat he offered and swung with all her might, backward, nearly striking him in the head. The yard erupted with startled laughter. Even Liesel cracked a reluctant smile before hardening her face again. Whitaker noticed these small exchanges with caution. He allowed music to play in the evenings, Glenn Miller drifting across the camp, horns weaving through the dusk. It lifted spirits, but he knew too much closeness risked breaking discipline. One evening, his officers questioned him over cigars. "You're spoiling them," one said. Whitaker replied evenly, "Better spoiled than savage. You treat people like beasts, they become beasts. You treat them with humanity, they give you order." His words silenced debate, though unease lingered. Not all was light. Rumors crept through the camp like shadows. News of Allied victories, of German retreats, filtered in through radios and whispers. Each cheer from beyond the fence was another reminder of what had been lost. Some women cried silently at night, muffling sobs in thin blankets. Others seethed, clinging to old loyalties, whispering prayers for Hitler's salvation. Liesel clenched her fists under the covers, torn between fury and the creeping weight of doubt. One evening, Anna confided quietly as they sat by the fence's edge during rest hour. "I think," she said, staring at the golden fields, "that kindness is more frightening than cruelty. Cruelty makes sense. You resist it, you survive. But kindness—" Her voice trailed off, her pencil scratching faintly in her journal. "Kindness makes you wonder what else was a lie." Liesel turned sharply. "Don't let them fool you. They feed us now, but they will send us back to ruins." Anna closed her book. "And ruins are not softened by bitterness. At least we can remember this." The fences themselves became a paradox, barriers that confined yet also protected. Beyond them, war still raged. Within them, life followed a rhythm oddly gentler than expected. At night, the women listened to the distant whistle of trains, the lowing of cattle, the soft murmur of guards. Sometimes, in the hush before dawn, they could almost forget they were prisoners at all. Yet the reminder always returned. A rifle's click, the shadow of a tower, the barbed wire gleaming silver under moonlight. Every kindness was edged with steel. Every moment of laughter was haunted by the knowledge that it could be stripped away. As summer deepened, the women began to change in ways small but undeniable. Liesel, once rigid with suspicion, found herself humming absent-mindedly while scrubbing floors. Anna, whose journal had begun as record-keeping, now filled its pages with reflections, comparisons, even hope. The guards, too, softened. Bobby once smuggled a peach from the officers' mess, sliding it across the bench toward Liesel. She stared at it, lips tight, before finally biting into the fruit. Juice ran down her chin, and Bobby, laughing, handed her a handkerchief. For a heartbeat, they were simply two young people sharing summer sweetness. But the sweetness never lingered without bitterness. That night, Liesel lay awake, replaying the taste of the peach and hating herself for enjoying it. She whispered into the dark, "They are the enemy. Remember that." Yet her heart betrayed her, clinging to the memory of sunlight, laughter, and the peach's tender flesh. Anna, sensing the shift in her friend, wrote by candlelight, "Perhaps captivity is not the iron chain we imagined, but a mirror. What we see depends not on the guards, but on ourselves." Whitaker, reviewing reports in his office, paused over the daily rations list. It struck him with quiet irony. The prisoners ate 3,000 calories a day, often more than families outside the wire could afford in ration stamps. He wondered what would happen when these women returned to a Germany starved and broken. Would they tell stories of Coca-Cola and peaches, or would they bury them out of shame? He took another sip of bourbon, the weight of contradictions pressing against him. The cicadas sang louder that night, their droning chorus rising as the sky bruised into twilight. The women lay in their bunks, each caught in private storms of memory, guilt, and reluctant gratitude. The fences glowed silver in the moonlight, unyielding yet strangely protective, holding them in a world that was not freedom but was not the nightmare they had feared either. And as Anna closed her journal with a sigh, she felt the faintest tremor of unease. For kindness, she realized, could not last forever. And when it ended, its absence might wound more deeply than cruelty ever could. The first photographs arrived folded into newspapers smuggled past the gates, the ink still smelling of fresh print. They showed skeletal figures behind wire, eyes hollow, limbs like sticks draped in striped cloth. The women in the Kansas camp stared at the images in stunned silence. For days they had believed the American stories were exaggerations, propaganda meant to twist their loyalties. But here, in the black and white grain, the truth stared back at them. Concentration camps, mountains of corpses, smoke rising from chimneys that had nothing to do with factories. Anna Vogel traced one picture with her finger, her throat tight. She had taught her pupils back in Bavaria about loyalty, sacrifice, the fatherland. Now she felt her lessons crumbling into ash. "If this is what Germany has done," she whispered to herself, "then perhaps we deserve to be prisoners." She closed her journal without writing. Words, for once, refused her. Liesel Hartmann reacted with rage that masked fear. "Lies," she spat, even as her voice faltered. "They make us believe our country is monstrous so we will forget who we are." Yet that night she lay awake, the faces from the photographs rising in her mind. She pressed her palms over her eyes, willing them away, but they remained. Mercy in Kansas tasted like betrayal when measured against the horror back home. The guards, too, wrestled with dissonance. Private Bobby Malone stared at the images longer than he admitted, his boyish grin faltering. His brother was fighting in Italy. The thought of him slogging through mud while Bobby stood here guarding women who drank Coca-Cola unsettled him. He wrote home, "Sometimes I think these prisoners eat better than I do. But when I see what the papers say about Germany, I wonder if keeping them well-fed isn't the best punishment of all." Captain Whitaker handled the tension with his usual reserve. He gathered the guards one evening, the photos spread across his desk. "Remember your orders," he said. "These prisoners are not the architects of those camps. They are pieces caught in a machine they did not build. We treat them well, not because they deserve it, but because we must be better than the world they left behind." His voice was calm, but his knuckles whitened as he folded the papers. Daily life continued, but something had shifted. The women worked in the fields with slower steps, their chatter dulled. The music in the evenings felt heavier, Glenn Miller's brass notes carrying an edge of sorrow. Anna recorded small observations again. How the sky seemed too wide, how the wheat bent in the wind like heads bowed in prayer. Her words carried less resistance now, more reflection, as though the fences themselves had become teachers. Liesel clung harder to defiance. When Bobby handed her another peach one hot afternoon, she accepted it only to throw the pit into the dirt with unnecessary force. "I will not be tamed by fruit," she muttered, though the sweetness had lingered on her tongue. Bobby laughed uneasily, sensing the storm beneath her words. "Suit yourself," he said, but he carried the memory of her eyes that looked at him not with hatred alone, but with something torn between longing and grief. Cultural exchanges crept in like weeds through cracks. The women embroidered linens with German patterns, which the American wives admired when visiting. In turn, the guards taught them bits of English: thank you, good morning, baseball. The word Coca-Cola became its own language, needing no translation. The first time one of the auxiliaries tried swing dancing under the watch of amused soldiers, laughter rippled across the yard. Even Liesel could not help but smile, though she quickly bit her lip to hide it. Yet laughter was dangerous. It softened edges that some wanted sharp. Rumors swirled that not all Americans approved of this generosity. "You're wasting sugar on enemies while your neighbors ration," one letter to the War Department read. Whitaker burned such letters in his office stove, watching the ashes curl. He believed the policy sound. Feed them, house them, let them see what America was. Someday they would carry stories back across the Atlantic, and those stories might plant seeds stronger than any bomb. One evening, as the women sat by the fence during rest hour, Anna whispered to Liesel, "I think kindness has undone me more than cruelty ever could. It makes me wonder who we are if those we call enemies treat us better than our own leaders did." Her words trembled like a confession. Liesel turned away sharply. "Do not say that. You betray everything." But her own conviction wavered. She thought of the bruised soldier she had once treated in a field hospital. A boy barely 18 who whispered, "Danke," before dying. If her country had built places like the photos showed, what had he died for? The conflict seeped into dreams. Anna woke one night sobbing softly, clutching her journal. She wrote by candlelight, "When Whitaker's little girl handed me a cookie through the fence today, I felt shame heavier than chains. How do you eat a child's kindness when your own people starve?" She blew out the candle and lay trembling, the taste of sugar unbearable on her tongue. The guards, too, wrestled with contradictions. Bobby confided to a fellow soldier, "Ain't right, feeling sorry for them. My brother's bleeding out somewhere while I'm here making sure these gals get ice cream." His friend shrugged. "Maybe that's the point. We fight there so we don't have to fight here." But Bobby could not shake the unease. The war was supposed to be simple, good men versus evil. Yet here, behind the fences, the lines blurred. Whitaker felt it most sharply. He caught himself watching the women during meals, noticing how they smiled cautiously at small comforts. He remembered his daughter's question, "Do the lady enemies cry at night?" He now knew the answer. He saw it in their eyes each morning, red-rimmed but determined. And though he reminded himself daily that he commanded prisoners, some part of him could not ignore the simple truth. They were also human beings trying not to break. Autumn winds swept across the plains, rattling the barbed wire, sending leaves skittering across the yard. The golden fields dulled to brown, the days shortening. With the change of season came new rumors. The war in Europe might soon end. The women whispered about home, about whether home still existed. Some clung to hope of reunion, others dreaded the return to rubble. Anna wrote, "We are caught in a strange mercy. Inside the fences, life is whole. Beyond them, only ruins await." The tension reached a quiet breaking point one afternoon when Liesel collapsed in the infirmary, exhaustion catching up to her. Bobby, stationed nearby, rushed in without thinking, helping her to her feet. She jerked away, snarling, "I don't need your pity." But her legs trembled, and she leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Bobby stood awkwardly, hands half raised. "Ain't pity," he said softly. "Just being human." The words struck her harder than a blow. She turned her face away, fighting tears, hating him for the kindness she could not refuse. That night, she admitted to Anna in a whisper, "I don't know who I am anymore. If cruelty defines enemies, then what does kindness make us?" Anna pressed her journal into Liesel's hands. "It makes us alive. That is enough for now." Liesel returned the book, but not before reading a line that lingered. "We win wars not only with bombs but with bread." She lay awake, repeating the words until sleep finally claimed her. The camp seemed quieter after that, as if everyone sensed the war's shadow pressing closer. The women worked, ate, laughed occasionally, but every moment was tinged with unease. The photographs had planted a seed of doubt that grew daily, twisting loyalties, reshaping identities. Even Whitaker, steady as stone, felt it. He wrote in his own private notes, "We believe fences protect us, but they also reveal us. Mercy is a dangerous weapon. It pierces deeper than bullets." One evening, as the women gathered in the fading light, Anna noticed something unusual. Beyond the fence, in the distant fields, a train whistle echoed, a long, mournful sound that seemed to come from another world. The women turned their heads in unison, their faces pale. Liesel gripped the wire, eyes wide. That whistle was not a promise of home, but a reminder of transport ships waiting, of displacement, of an uncertain future hurtling toward them. The guards called them back inside, but the sound lingered, vibrating through the air long after the train had passed. In that moment, the women understood what kindness inside the camp had hidden. The fences would not hold them forever. Beyond lay a world fractured, waiting to test them in ways no ice cream or Coca-Cola could soften. Anna closed her journal with shaking hands. The last line she wrote before the lights went out carried a weight she could not explain. Sweetness is fleeting. And when it is gone, its absence may wound deeper than cruelty ever did. The winter of 1946 carried with it an unfamiliar quiet. Snow dusted the barracks roof, softening the sharp edges of the camp, muffling the clang of boots and the hum of barbed wire. Inside, the German women whispered of rumors too persistent to ignore. The war was long over, Germany broken and divided, yet they remained in Kansas, suspended between captivity and freedom. Word finally spread through the camp like a tremor. Repatriation orders had arrived. Anna Vogel closed her journal and held it tightly to her chest, as though the thin notebook could anchor her in the storm that loomed ahead. She had imagined this moment for months, yet now the thought of stepping beyond the fences filled her with unease. The barracks, for all their plain walls and narrow beds, had become a strange sanctuary. Beyond lay rubble, hunger, and faces hardened by defeat. Here, at least, there was food, warmth, and the curious mercy of their captors. Liesel Hartmann, by contrast, bristled at the announcement. For her, the camp had always been a gilded cage, and even gilded cages remained cages. She stared at the snow beyond the window and said with conviction, "Better ruins than fences. At least ruins are ours." Yet her voice cracked when she added, "If they still exist." Captain James Whitaker delivered the orders with his usual calm, though a heaviness underlined his words. "You will soon be transported home," he told the assembled women. "The process will take weeks, perhaps months. You will leave in groups. Until then, life continues as it has." His tone betrayed nothing, But afterward he lingered by the window, watching them disperse with measured steps, as if he too wondered whether release was mercy or cruelty. Private Bobby Malone reacted with unguarded honesty. "Well, hell," he muttered to a fellow guard. "I'll miss the lot of 'em. Even the sharp-tongued one." He didn't name Liesel, but the flush in his cheeks gave him away. He had watched her walls crumble piece by piece, never fully, but enough to glimpse the storm inside. The thought of her vanishing across the ocean into ruins unsettled him more than he could admit. Life in the camp took on a bittersweet rhythm. Every familiar routine, the morning bell, the rattle of trays in the mess hall, the low murmur of music in the evenings, suddenly carried the weight of finality. Anna wrote furiously in her journal, recording every detail, from the crunch of snow under boots to the glimmer of ice on the fence. She feared forgetting, feared that in Germany no one would believe what she had lived. One afternoon, Whitaker's young daughter visited the camp again, bundled in wool, her cheeks rosy from the cold. She approached Liesel through the fence, holding a small bottle of Coca-Cola in mittened hands. "For you," the child said softly, her English words halting but clear. Liesel knelt, eyes stinging, and took the bottle with trembling fingers. She whispered in German, "For home," though she knew the word had grown hollow. The girl smiled and ran back to her father, leaving Liesel staring at the glass bottle as though it were a relic. Farewells began quietly, almost shamefully. A group of women left in January, bundled into trucks that rolled away across the frozen plains. Tears were shed on both sides of the fence. The remaining prisoners pressed close to the wire, watching the convoy disappear, their breath ghosting into the air. The absence afterward was palpable, the barracks emptier, the yard quieter. As the weeks passed, departures continued. Each farewell chipped away at the illusion that the camp might last forever. Anna found herself clinging to Bobby's awkward jokes, Whitaker's steady presence, even the harsh Kansas wind. She feared what awaited in Germany. Hunger, suspicion, stories dismissed as fantasy. "They won't believe me," she confided to Liesel one night. "They'll think I invented it all. Coca-Cola, ice cream, kindness, it will sound like madness." Liesel, lying stiff on her bunk, whispered back, "Then perhaps madness is safer than truth." By March, Anna's name appeared on the repatriation list. She felt a strange mix of dread and relief. On her last morning in camp, she stood near the fence, journal pressed to her chest, and watched the sky bloom pink with dawn. Bobby approached, shuffling his boots in the snow. "Safe travels, ma'am," he said, his voice softer than usual. Then, after a pause, he added, "Write it down so folks don't forget." Anna nodded, fighting tears. "I already have." Her departure left Liesel hollow. She had depended on Anna's steady words, her way of softening hard truths with careful reflection. Now she faced the final weeks alone, clinging to the brittle armor of defiance. Yet when her name was finally called in April, she felt not triumph but dread. She had dreamed of escape, yet now the thought of leaving the strange mercy of the camp filled her with terror. The farewell was sharp, almost violent in its restraint. She walked toward the trucks, her satchel thin, her boots heavy. Whitaker stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. As she passed him, she forced herself to meet his gaze. He gave a single nod, a soldier's farewell, but she read in his eyes something unspoken, regret, perhaps even respect. Bobby, standing farther off, tipped his cap awkwardly. "Take care, Liesel," he called. Her name on his lips startled her more than any order ever had. She turned her head, gave the faintest nod, and then climbed into the truck without looking back. The convoy rumbled away, leaving the camp behind. The snow melted as the days lengthened, and by the time Liesel's ship docked in Germany, spring had begun to break. Yet the land she returned to bore little resemblance to the country she had left. Cities lay in ruins, streets littered with rubble, hunger etched into every face. Home had become a graveyard. Neighbors met her stories with disbelief, sometimes anger. When she mentioned Coca-Cola ice cream, they scoffed. "Lies," one woman spat. "Americans starved us, and you dare speak of sweetness?" Liesel fell silent, swallowing the truth like a stone. In the silence, shame grew. Better, it seemed to forget. Anna fared little better. When she shared passages from her journal, her family accused her of being softened, corrupted by the enemy. "You dishonor the dead," her brother snarled. She closed the book, hiding it in a drawer, and never read from it again. Yet at night, she whispered the words to herself, clinging to them like a lifeline. Years passed. The camp faded into memory, a story told in fragments, often dismissed. But not all traces vanished. Anna, older now, sat with her granddaughter one summer evening, the air thick with the scent of baking bread. She opened a tin of ice cream, store-bought, ordinary, and watched the girl's delight as it melted down her chin. Anna smiled softly, tasting the sweetness herself, and whispered, "Prison can have fences, but kindness has wings." The child laughed, not understanding, but the words hung in the air like a benediction. Liesel, too, carried the memory, though she spoke of it rarely. In her old age she kept a single relic on her shelf, an empty Coca-Cola bottle, its glass scratched but unbroken. Visitors thought it a trinket, meaningless. She never corrected them. At night, she touched the bottle and remembered the moment a child had pressed it into her hands, and how it had weighed more than chains. Whitaker never spoke publicly of the camp. He retired quietly, his war records filed away, his service noted but not celebrated. Yet he carried the images of those women with him always, their suspicion, their gradual softening, the tears as they departed. He believed, though he never said aloud, that he had fought his most important battle not with weapons but with bread, music, and mercy. Bobby told stories, of course, in his own fashion. Around kitchen tables and bar counters, he laughed about German girls trying baseball, about the one who nearly knocked him flat with a backward swing. But he never spoke of the peach, or of the way Liesel's eyes had looked that last morning. Some memories, he understood, were too tender to share. The story of the camp did not make headlines, did not shape treaties or monuments. It lived quietly, carried in journals, in bottles, in the taste of sugar on tongues that had once expected only iron. Its power was not in scale but in symbol, that even in war, humanity could appear where it was least expected, fragile but real, like ice cream on a hot day in a place meant for punishment. The final chapter of that story is not written in orders or archives, but in memory, in the way sweetness lingers long after it has melted. The fences had fallen away, the barbed wire rusting in forgotten fields, yet the mercy given inside them traveled farther than any convoy. It lived in whispers, in journals hidden in drawers, in bottles left untouched on shelves, in grandchildren licking ice cream on summer evenings without knowing why the taste carried tears. And though the women had returned to ruins, though their words were doubted and their memories mocked, the truth remained unbroken, like glass that has endured fire. In the war of steel and fire, they had discovered something stronger than either. Mercy, unexpected and unearned, had lodged itself in their bones. Liesel, in her final years, admitted it only once, to a nurse who asked about the bottle on her shelf. Her voice cracked, but her eyes held steady. "That," she said, "is what kindness tastes like. And kindness outlasts war." The words lingered in the quiet room, as powerful as any victory, as fragile as any memory, and as enduring as the sweetness that had once melted on her tongue in a Kansas prison yard.